We're going to begin Chapter 6, Looking for Amanda. Our first stop in the search for Amanda was at the Sarasota Herald Tribune's local Venice bureau, where reporter Erlal Kimmel helped break the story of Atta's American Squeeze. We asked him if he had any clue about what had happened to her. Was she just a reluctant witness, or had she been frightened into silence? Kimmel knew a bit about reluctant witnesses. He'd found some strippers who had danced for Atta in a Sarasota strip joint, for example, but then encountered resistance from the strip joint's management when he wanted to ask them a few questions. A dancer at the Cheetah Lounge in Sarasota also reported seeing one of the alleged terrorists, Atta, at the strip club, Kimmel reported. Several other Cheetah employees, shown in pictures of the men who trained in Venice, said they looked somewhat familiar. A club manager escorted a Herald Tribune reporter out of the club shortly afterward, saying that the Cheetah had no comment. Maybe the manager didn't want publicity, but probably he didn't want his girls to talk because he'd been clued in on the need for secrecy. Whether the strippers had knowledge about Atta was fast becoming rhetorical. Kimmel said he had no idea where Amanda Keller was currently. He thought she left town, wished us luck in finding her, and with a weak smile let us know that if we did find her, he had a few questions he'd like answered too. Our next stop was Fantasies and Lingerie, where Amanda had worked as a private dancer. Like Cheetah's, it's just down the street from the Sarasota airport. It turned out to be a locked-down facility in a rundown strip mall. No windows, one door, locked. The only access was through an intercom. The manager told us to go away. He had no employees named Amanda. No, he would not come out. Next, Kimmel's second story about Atta and Amanda included a brief phone interview he'd done with her. She was speaking to him from her mother's house in the northern Florida town of Lady Lake, said the article. In a telephone interview late Friday, Keller said she met Atta through a friend and let him stay in the apartment with her and her then boyfriend, Garrett Metz, because she felt sorry for him. She said authorities told her not to say anything at all about Atta, reported Kimmel. Garrett Metz is or was the hot guy Amanda met in a Sarasota nightclub while with Atta. Kimmel's account contained the 11 words she said before lapsing into silence. I can't really discuss anything, she told him. I'm afraid I'll get in trouble. Amanda's mother had met Atta too. Keller's mother, Susan Payne of Lady Lake, remembered Atta, Kimmel reported. I didn't like him. He just seemed strange, she said. We eventually lost count of the number of eyewitnesses who told reporters Atta creeped them out. Atta dressed in a casual yuppie fashion, said Amanda's mother. Her daughter told her he mostly kept to himself. Amanda had taken him in because he said he had nowhere to stay, she said. Stray dogs, stray cats, stray people. She was always taught to help anybody out when they needed help, Payne said. A real humanitarian, we're sure, concerned with children and every living thing. But since she'd also been, if only briefly, the girlfriend of a man with the blood of 3,000 innocent human beings. Jesus Christ. A real humanitarian, we're sure, concerned with children and every living thing. But since she'd also been, if only briefly, the girlfriend of a man with blood of 3,000 innocent human beings on his hands, somebody should have been asserting the people's right to know here. But it's strange nobody did. We went looking for Garrett Metz, the Studley boyfriend for whom Amanda dumped Atta, only to discover he had been killed the previous summer in a car accident. We visited his last known address, a modest two-bedroom ranch house in South Venice. There we met Garrett's younger brother, who remembered Amanda as well. When your older brother's dating a stripper with pink to orange to dyed blonde hair, he lets us understand. You tend to pay attention. Amanda and Atta even lived briefly, he said, with Garrett's family. We checked the neighbors and discovered several who knew all about Amanda Keller and a Mohomed Atta. In fact, one neighbor had said that the lady across the street still had Atta's dog. From her description, we recognized that she must be talking about the little dog who survived Atta's kitten-killing spree by hiding under a couch. Garrett's brother passed on the names of some of Atta's girlfriends, Olivia, Angeline, Paige. They used to hang out together at a bar called Crawdads on the Intracoastal Canal, which wends through Venice. We were puzzled when we couldn't find the Crawdads listed in the phone book. Then we learned it had closed a year ago, and the owners had moved on to open a new place called the Big Easy. On the chance that the clientele of Crawdads had followed the owners to their new place, we stopped by, and although it was only late afternoon, the bar was busy already, filled with a mix of prosperous-looking older men sipping whiskey, catered to by an attractive young waitstaff, busy killing the hour between 5 and 6. One young waitress, we noticed, had something shiny sticking out of her tongue, a diamond stud. We thought, these could be Amanda's people. We struck up a conversation at the bar, and several beers later had made contact with a blonde woman in her 20s named Lori, who had known Amanda. The only problem was she didn't want to talk about her. She gave as her reason for protecting her friend, who wants to be known as a terrorist's girlfriend. It made a certain sense. Still, privacy concerns and matters pertaining to 9/11 seemed clearly outweighed the search for the killers of 3,000 people. So we drove up to Lady Lake, a smallish town tucked into the hill country of northern Florida. We thought we'd try to get in touch with Amanda's mother, Susan Payne, but the house had been abandoned. There was broken glass all over the driveway. Susan Payne had died months ago, a neighbor told us. Another daughter, Tammy, had moved away. On a sweltering, hot August day that seemed to come right out of the movie Body Heat, we visited Amanda's former residences in the Venice area. We found another house where she had lived, this one on Minnesota Key near Northport, but it too was vacant. Then, in Port Charlotte, just to the south of Northport, we pulled up to another of Amanda's former residences and got lucky. A man was mowing his lawn in front of the house. We knew Amanda, sure. His stepson had lived with Amanda 2 years ago, he said. He appeared not to have much use for either. He and his wife, the stepson's mother, were raising the stepson's 2 children. The stepson was something of an unfit parent. He couldn't tell us where the stepson was, but he knew he was no longer with Amanda. The stepson's living arrangements were currently fluid. We regrouped. It was time to review what we had already learned. We reread news accounts and in the process discovered another story about Amanda and Atta, and had come out a week after the initial flurry of reports. We were amazed at what it contained. The Sarasota Herald Tribune was reversing itself. Though not through a reaction, Amanda Keller had not lived with Mohomed Atta, the paper now reported, but with another Mohomed, a Mohomed who had somehow previously escaped mention. The headline offered a clue to the contortions somebody was going through to offer this news to the world. The paper, as we've seen, was counting the ever-increasing number of terrorists said to have passed through Venice in its headlines. They were they were up to 5. Fifth pilot trainee vanishes. I need water. Mohomed slept on her couch, a Venice woman says. Investigators have identified a fifth man of Middle Eastern descent who trained to fly in Venice, but they don't know if he was involved in the September 11th attacks because they can't find him. He told the people he lived with in Venice earlier this year that he was moving to Paris, the paper reported. The man, known as Mohomed, stayed at Amanda Keller's unit in the Sandpiper Apartments complex on Airport Avenue in April. Authorities would not release the man's full name, and Keller would not divulge it, citing instructions from the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. There had been a fifth terrorist pilot in Venice, authorities were now asserting. By itself, that is not too surprising. There may have been dozens. His name was Mohomed with an extra M in the middle. Strangely enough, the similarities between him and the terrorist ringleader didn't end with their similar names. The two Mohammeds share a lot of characteristics. Like Atta, who, as we've seen, told Amanda he was French. This new Mohomed also had a French connection of sorts, he said. He was moving to Paris. Also, like Atta, this other Mohomed had an icky personality. He would leer. Tammy Payne, Keller's sister, told reporters. God, he was creepy. This other Mohammed's chief, and apparently only salient characteristics, seemed to be that he was not the Mohomed whose name was Atta. Idrissi, said the men, told her they wanted to eat but didn't like what was on the menu, so she sent them to a Chinese restaurant a few doors down. They were very rude, she said. They didn't want to pay the bill when asked if they could afford the $48 bar tab. Atta's face had darkened. He pulled out a thick roll. You think I can't pay? I'm a pilot for American Airlines. I can pay my fucking bill. Atta and two of his buddies seemed to have gone out for a farewell bender at a seafood bar called Shuckums, Newsweek reported. Atta drank 5 Stolian fruit juices, while one of the others drank rum and coke. For once, Atta and his friends became agitated, shouting curse words in Arabic, reportedly including a particularly blasphemous one that roughly translate as fuck God. Time magazine puts it this way. It was at Shuckums on September 8th that Mohammed Atta and Marwan al-Shehi did some pre-mass murder tripling. Atta drank vodka and orange juice, while al-Shehi preferred rum and cokes, 5 drinks apiece. One eyewitness interviewed at Shuckums described Atta as having something more than just an eerie presence. He was kind of strange because he was just staring, the woman told Brian Ross on NBC, and every time I'd walk in and out, he had the same look on his face, so God knows what was going through his mind. Now I guessed we know what was going through his mind. He had a very intense-looking face, very intense-looking eyes. Along with other reports of heavy drinking which were surfacing, the report was at odds with the portrait, the official story, that was beginning to emerge of the terrorist ringleader, raising questions about whether Atta was really a fanatic and a puritanical Islamic fundamentalist, Wahhabi desert dweller, or just a guy who knows the importance of Stoli's authentic Russian heritage when you're letting the night unfold. Were they sure he was Islamic Were they sure he was an Islamic fundamentalist? Maybe Atta was Islamic Stolinaya. Then a witness's conspicuous reaction came to the rescue of the official story. Night manager Ottermos changed his story. Mohomed Atta drank nothing stronger than cranberry juice that evening at Chuckham's bar, Tony Amos said. He was sitting quietly by himself. It had been Atta's companion, Marwan, and a third man that did all the drinking. Case closed. Everyone by this time had seen the brooding mugshot of Mohomed Atta, complete with unnerving, icy stare. It is all plausible that Atta could be mistaken for someone else. For the teddy bear Marwan, we wanted to ask Tony Amos, but when we stopped at Chuckham's, we discovered that neither he nor bartender Idrisi were there any longer. No one knew where they'd gone. The current bartender, before she realized, said too much, indicating their leave taking had been somehow. Wait a minute. No one knew where they'd gone. The current bartender, before she realized she said too much, indicated their leave taking had been somehow 9/11 related. Amos and Idrisi had purchased tickets to the island of lost witnesses, hopefully round trip. A week later, when the Los Angeles Times mentioned the night at Chuckham's in a story on the terrorists' final days, the reports of heavy drinking were gone. The story didn't even mention it. The same night, September 7th, down the coast in Florida, Atta and Al-Shehi went to Chuckham's Sport Bar in Hollywood along with a still unidentified third man. The owner, Tony Amos, says Atta sat quietly by himself and drank cranberry juice and played a video game while Al-Shehi and the other customers tossed back mixed drinks and argued. Why did the restaurant manager change his story? We read carefully through the detailed early accounts of the incident and were left as suspect We read carefully through the detailed early accounts of the incident and were left, as we suspected you are, with a startling conclusion. The manager's reaction was coerced because the two employees' initial remembrances of the encounter were just too full of vivid details. Amos says they had chicken wings and stoli Captain Morgan spiced rum and coke. He said Mohomed was drunk. His voice was slurred. Bartender Idrisi recalls how many drinks, 5, each downed, and said Atta paid her with a $100 bill from a thick wad, but left only a $3 tip. Bartenders remember things like that. Stories of the terrorist ringleaders' two-fisted drinking habits we will be hearing more lead inevitably to doubts about an official narrative which insisted that the villains who attacked defenseless civilians and broke the hearts of Americans were cave-dwelling religious fanatics who had been cast out of their own society. Well, what if they weren't? After all, it's not as if Chuckham's story was the only drinking incident. There were many. The London Sunday Mail, to cite just one example, reported Atta and Al-Shehi spent $1,000 and 45 minutes on Krug and Perrier Jout champagne at a Palm Beach bar called 251 Sunrise. Marwan was with a short blonde, said the paper, while Atta was with a 6-foot-tall, busty brunette in her late 20s. This has the ring of truth. Sidekicks don't get to pick first. The Mail reported both of the women were known locally as regular companions of high rollers. Are there Islamic fundamentalist high rollers? If the truth can be so easily manipulated as the incident at Shuckham's seems to show, then inconvenient knowledge about the hijackers might contain information that would force a reprisal of just who, in fact, our enemy was. What remained were sanitized reports like the September 22nd Washington Post. The Friday night before the attacks, Atta and two other men, one of them another suspected hijacker, Marwan al-Shehi, spent 3.5 hours at a sports bar in Hollywood, Florida called Shuckham's. Atta played video games, a pursuit out of line with fundamentalist beliefs. But the manager on duty that night has said that he doesn't recall seeing Atta drink alcohol. We were witnessing evidence of a federal cleanup crew in action? Were they scrubbing down Florida and sanitizing the public record of inconvenient knowledge? We knew one thing. We still wanted to find Amanda Keller because the fifth pilot was the unknown terrorist. His entire existence, for the record, consisted of his stay with Amanda. There were no follow-up stories about him, no fifth pilot identified headlines. Even his name remained a mystery. He was Mohomed, no last name. He went totally unmentioned in later in-depth news accounts about the Hamburg's cadre key members. He was the man who was not there. After serving the purpose of disabusing the public of the notion that Mohomed Atta had lived with Keller in March and April of 2001, he retired from the earthly existence, was immediately forgotten, and has never been mentioned again by the press or by authorities. Except for Amanda Keller saying so in her reaction, there was absolutely no evidence that he had ever existed at all. And yet this transparent ruse was somehow strangely successful in keeping the press from going after the story. The part that really hurts is not so much that they take us for fools and want to get away with it. It's that they might be right. We made a new rule of thumb. When the FBI identifies someone with only one name, don't believe anything they say. And we continued to search for Amanda Keller and finally got the break we'd been hoping for. On our third or fourth phone call to the police chief of Lady Lake seeking information on Amanda and her family, he turned us over to Debbie, the department's detective in charge of juvenile and child welfare cases. Debbie already knew quite a bit about Amanda. She had known her and her family as well. Police had been called out to their place regularly. They had been involved in a lot of domestics. Despite being only 21, Amanda Keller had 2 children, Deborah stated. She was divorcing from the children's father. He had her Baker acted, which meant she was declared a threat to herself and not a fit parent. There had been a court filing, the result of which was that Steve Keller, the father, won custody of the 2 toddlers. Amanda had had drinking and drug problems. For that matter, so had her husband. Amanda's mother, Susan Payne, died 3 months after September 11th. Sometime in December, after attending her funeral, Amanda abducted her 2 children from the parent with lawful custodial care and fled the state, Debbie stated. She took her children to a maternal aunt's house in a large Midwestern state and turned herself in to state authorities there. Custodial arrangements were now being worked out jointly by the 2 states. Amanda was working to put her life together, Debbie told us. She was sober. She was in a stable living environment. Amanda's aunt was involved. She and her husband had been 2 immature kids with babies, she said. Amanda had absolutely no parenting skills at the time, and she was from a family where there were no parenting skills. The situation was being monitored, Debbie stated. Would we like the aunt's phone number? We made an unsuccessful attempt to sound nonchalant. Yes, please, we replied. That would be nice. I think we'll do chapter 7 tomorrow. Yeah.